Hi, I'm Ikea, and for today's video, I want to ramble on for a bit about the journey caches that we receive from completing and claiming certain journey steps from 3 to 7. For each of those, we get a cache. In those caches, there is a whole build, basically, where it contains 6 pieces of gear and some weapons. And those are actually there from the devs to kind of entice people to go towards certain builds, especially for newer players. We'll give them a few exotics, a few named weapons and such to get them going, together with some simple builds, or at least some pieces for some simple builds. And this was already the case last season. And last season, I made a similar video. And then what we can do on top of that, or I can try to provide, is taking those builds and saying, oh, what pieces to keep if it's worth actually going towards this gear set, and then also what would be a real build with that set. As usually, these are kind of jumbled messes and also kind of intended in that way. They're basically starting points for some players. Just the same as last season, I haven't let myself be spoiled on any of these. I have no idea what's in any of these. We'll go and claim them, open them up, and you'll see my first reaction. We'll go over what is worth keeping, what isn't, and then also go if there is a viable setup with that gear or gear set. We'll go and with the build collection, kind of show what that could become if you spend sometimes likely just rearranging some of the gear pieces or going and farming up some extra pieces, and together with what's in those caches, making a viable build. And I very much enjoy this style of video because it basically lets me talk about builds and such. It gives me some ammo to talk about, and then we try to give some helpful information along the way. So yeah, let's go get started. And to make completely clear which caches we're talking about, if we go into our season track, if we go into journey, for completing Journey 2, we unlock Journey 3 onwards. From Journey 3 onwards, for 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, we get one of these Journey build caches. And this was the same last season when we completed this journey steps. This would be part of the reward, together as well with some season XP. Now, I've already season 100. As a tip as well, if you are already season 100, or if you want to keep these for later, because we'll level up the season very much, and if you're not that interested in these journey caches, you don't need to claim these. You can save these for later and then claim them when there is, for instance, in a few weeks, we'll have the Rainbow Six event, which will use up season XP, and then you would be able to use that season XP for that by claiming it then. But here, of course, for the purposes of this video, I am going to claim them. And we'll just go in a line here and claim them one by one, open them up, discuss that, and then I'll take a second to set up a build similar to it, either from my collection of builds on my characters or from the build collection, and then we'll discuss a somewhat, let's say, a real variant of it. But usually as well, these are not intended to be completely a meta build out of the box. They're usually just some of the pieces of a gear set and just something to just get some people get started. And yeah, of course, that's for new players. That's very handy. Let's go start with that first one. And let's grab indeed this one from a journey season, or journey mission 3. This one's tied to, and I wonder actually if there is some attachment in this way, where last season we had, of course, the main modifier was attached to having firearms, electronics, and stamina, which was basically red, blue, and yellow, and we got a red, blue, and a yellow build out of it. I wonder actually if any of these builds are kind of tied to some of the actives of this season, as this one is, of course, very much tied to Spiced Up for 3. Let's claim our reward here and get that cache, as yeah, we get that journey build cache. And in there, we also actually got a knee pad I saw there. So yeah, we got a tipping skills knee pad as a reward as well. So let's open up this piece and get our cache out of here. So 3 pieces of Cheska, a rugged gauntlets as exotics, a forge, and an empress piece, and cricket as a named LMG. This is an interesting put together. I kind of can see the idea here because yeah, actually for Spiced Up, rugged is a thing you could use because that does improve our hipfire abilities, and Spiced Up is the one where if you trigger it, it removes all of your armor, you become a big ball of health instead, and you lose your ability to ADS, but you gain per stack, per hit, you gain a lot of damage. And yeah, it can be actually an interesting one to run around with. One of the weaker actives, I would say, mostly because we lose the ability to ADS, but the rugged gauntlets in here, I could see the idea of getting some out of there. Let me go and equip this build as is, and then we'll come back to it. And through the magic of editing, we have equipped every piece, and we can look at it a little bit. And this is then very much, yeah, set up for Spiced Up, where Spiced Up will give you a ton of health, and this increase to it would work as well. It takes away our ability to ADS and blind fire, and then this piece kind of leans into that, the rugged gauntlets. And one of the things as well with Spiced Up, while it removes all of your armor, you can still use your health, and you can also use a shield alongside of it, and that's kind of the play to kind of go for with it. And then we have two pieces that kind of deal into going into the shield here with Empress. Skill health will actually increase the shield as a skill, and this will improve its skill health of it. And together with that as well, we have the Forge, the named RNK holster here, which also has shield health as one of its stats. Now, overall, I wouldn't call this a real build here as well. I'm guessing that the talents given on especially the chest and the backpack are kind of randomized, and we have Wicked and Headhunter here. That wouldn't fit with this. We could take, for instance, with this together with the shield, just taking Obliterate plus, for instance, Adrenaline Rush maybe on the backpack, or even taking Unbreakable, although actually that would be armor, so that couldn't work. As yeah, we give up all of our armor. That's also why I'm not saying, for instance, Adrenaline Rush Intimidate, which for close range builds would kind of work out. But we have no armor once we trigger Spiced Up. It is weird, though, that they're giving us an LMG alongside of all this, because we can't use an LMG and a shield together. So something like a shotgun or an SMG or an AR would have made a lot more sense, I feel. Overall, though, this is yeah, this is one of those silly YouTube builds that you sometimes see of like, oh, I made something to, you know, this goes towards our health and this goes towards our shield, and then we'll get hipfire accuracy from this. The downside to all of this is that you're giving up so much damage that it's not going to work out in the real sense. From this, though, we can take actually a few pieces. This Cheska backpack, well, I'm not sure if it's going to come always with these stats, or for instance this talent, but if it comes with something useful like this is very much a usable Cheska backpack. We can take this with his weapon damage, crit chance, put crit damage alongside of it, keep the Wicked, and this could directly go into an ongoing directives build, basically, as being the backpack for that build. A Cheska mask, if we do get it with crit damage or crit chance, putting the other one alongside of it, a very useful piece that we quite often use. If you get a Cheska chest with either, for instance, having, well, you would need a right talent, and then together with at least one of the stats right, but maybe even starting out, just having a Cheska chest is better than none. And in this, I would, for instance, yeah, you could use this on a striker build, put Obliterate here instead. Headhunter would not be conducive to that piece, but here you would lose out on some of these stats. But for if you're level 2, and you can get the journey just done pretty easily, and yeah, this would be better than nothing. The other pieces, not so much. I would basically never recommend using a Forge or, for instance, an Empress piece like this. And the Rugged is also not that useful because, for instance, in a setup, if we're kind of going with this idea as well, we could, for instance, take instead the Memento, which has all that skill, health, and such. Now, we do lose our ability of regen with it, so it's not useful for that per se, but it can give us 2 tiers for a shield as well, in the same way that these 2 pieces give 2 tiers for it. And overall, is a much more useful piece overall. Now, yeah, for Spiced Up, if we are using a shield, we would just use some other LMG. The Cricket overall, Perfect Precision Strike is actually an interesting talent. It can give a lot of damage because it is a pretty hefty damage increase, because at 2 stacks, it is a 70% amplified damage from this. This is actually per stack. But you need to do this where you kill enemies outside of range and then activate it with hitting an enemy within range, which means that it's never going to be active on the first few kills, at the very least not the first kill, and you have to make that first kill at a pretty long distance, and then you have to hit an enemy within distance, and then you activate it. Also, the big downside of it is just for 5 seconds. That's why we generally don't consider Precision Strike as being a thing that we use. This 5 seconds, if everybody's just hiding for that 5 seconds, you wasted your time anyway. And you would much rather have something that has a little bit higher up rate than this. So overall, usable from this, I would would maybe, well, especially as well, if you don't have a rugged gauntlets, just hang on to this. It's an interesting piece to play around with here and there. For most people, though, this will get turned into an exotic component. Some of the Cheska pieces, if you get them with the right stats on them, well worth keeping. And the other ones, not so much. I wouldn't per se hang on to an Empress piece or an RNK. As well, actually, if you need some Empress pieces, you can always go farm for them. They come with yellow cores. This would be a piece, if you put it in your stash, that's kind of just hoarding, because this would be very easy to refarm something similar pretty fast. That's kind of the play to go with in Division. I generally look at pieces on if I'm keeping them or tossing them on how hard it would be to get this piece again if I needed to. So for instance, for a Cheska backpack like this, for instance, if I'm starting at and I'm interested in doing an OD, this is actually a pretty good piece. This Empress piece is likely one countdown away from having it again and just being set to targeted countdown, and because of that, I wouldn't stick this into my stash, even if I was intending to in the future maybe make a third drone build. So overall, yeah, if some of the Cheska pieces come out good, keep those, but the rest isn't per se worth keeping. Also, I wouldn't say this has an equivalent build in the build collection. This would just be a high-end red is likely what we would go with, but then we wouldn't go with the rugged. We wouldn't lean into going for this health for when it comes to it spiced up. Something like a tech tank already works pretty well for spiced up, but that's not very similar to this. So overall, we'll just leave it at this as, yeah, this is a funny idea to try out, but not per se useful. And going on to Journey 4, where this one is centered around advanced materiel. Curious what they give us here. I would expect maybe the tip of the spear, maybe? And yeah, I haven't let myself be spoiled on any of these. This is me just guessing. But I would think with the specialization weapon part of this, otherwise they might lean into the skill build part of this, but you wouldn't actually normally. Let's claim it though, and let's open it up. Let's see what we get. Actually, oh, it shows the spear already. Also see a ninja bike backpack. Now that is actually one of the nice things about these journey caches. They're pretty useful for newer players. Although maybe this is already a bad habit to form for them. But it does get, for instance, a ninja bike backpack. And this would be a pretty easy way, because completing those journey steps isn't hard. Reaching up to this point isn't hard. And then, yeah, you could have a ninja bike. Starting out, a ninja bike is not bad, especially it will allow you pretty easily to get into some of the builds. Here they're trying to ninja bike and tipping tip of the spears build together, which is kind of an odd choice. The backpack on tip of the spear is kind of the good part of tip of the spear. It is the powerful part of it. So ninja bike, as it often is, losing the ability to have that backpack talent kind of hurts a little bit. We see a Fox's Prayer, also a very handy piece for new players to get. It is a very powerful piece, can just slide into a bunch of builds. We got a Uzina piece. Sure. I'm trying to consider why, but it doesn't hurt. And we get a mechanical animal out of it. Let me go equip this again, and then we'll come back to it. As we come back to it, here equipped with 3 pieces of tip of the spear, together with a ninja bike. Now the ninja bike, of course, gives you that 4th piece. It effectively will up each piece of gear, of brand sets or gear sets. So here with 3 pieces of tip of the spear equipped, we have that 4th piece counting as a ninja bike. Together with that though, for the Fox's Prayer, we get some rifle damage and some accuracy out of it. And then here we get total armor and armor on kill, which is then kind of the thing it's leaning towards. This setup is leaning towards the bonuses from advanced materiel, where it provides a pretty hefty bonuses to specialization weapons. One of the choices made here to go with the tip of the spear chest is maybe not the one I would have picked. Generally, you go with the backpack and then without the chest, even though that tip of the spears doesn't get used much. That's also why for this one, I also do not have an equivalent from the build collection, because I don't have a tip of the spears set there anymore. But we'll look into a second into an old build picture and kind of how I laid it out for that. The chest does increase our signature weapon damage by a decent amount, but this aggressive recon is only triggered when we get a signature weapon kill. It isn't like in the past with Tip of the Spear where it was on signature weapon hit. You actually need to get a kill with it first to activate this bonus. And yeah, then that bonus here from the chest is being taken from that 15% to a 20% or to a 30%. And it's only for 10 seconds as well. And that's kind of the thing that hurt Tip of the Spear a little bit. That is a little bit short of a time range. Also, we need to get a kill first before we activate it. And then the chest is actually not that great for it. I would definitely take the backpack, which is I would consider the good part of Tip of the Spear. But here, of course, with this cache, what they're giving us is a way of getting a little bit of a Tip of the Spear feel. The ninja bike is actually a useful piece sometimes here and there. Now, the top-end builds, the meta builds, don't use it, but for a lot of comfortable builds, and especially for builds people might start out with, it is not the worst choice. There are worse choices to be made. But this Tip of the Spears is actually the weak part here. Yeah, other gear sets just do so much better. Let's give us a mechanical animal as well. Mechanical animals is somewhat useful where, yeah, especially with that taking us into overcharge from 2 skill tiers if we already have that. And of course here with advanced material, and this is likely the thing they're kind of leaning towards, I kind of as well feel that they're using these journey caches to kind of go like, hey, remember this part of the advanced material, for instance, where it does take us 2 6 skill tiers at level 5, but even at level 1, it still gives us 2 skill tiers here, even if we don't have technician. With this mechanical animal, when we activate the advanced material, we get 2 tiers from there. We can get a further 4 tiers from kills from the mechanical animal. And then we can take ourselves all the way to tier 6 and then overcharge even just with this. So kind of feel they're doing this kind of stuff with it, where they try to lean into, hey, remember to, to use it in certain ways. The armor and kill from Yuzina, I wouldn't per se give up 2 pieces of this for it. Being Fox's Prayer, well, Fox's Prayer by itself is a useful piece to have and definitely hang on to, for instance, this one, as it can go into a bunch of builds. Having a Fox's Prayer and then with not having a rifle, although, yeah, they wanted to likely lean into that Future Perfect and they wanted to give the named version. And the only other Future Perfection is from a marksman rifle. So this one at least kind of then still makes sense. The pieces to hang on to, a ninja bike is pretty useful, and Fox's Prayer is pretty useful. Tip of the Spear isn't that useful, but let's at least look at how I would set it up if I were to go with Tip of the Spear. And let's indeed come to the build collection. I'll link, of course, to the build collection, which is one of the things I'm most well known for, where we have all my builds, all my characters illustrated here in these pictures. Together with that, there's also a recommended build list, and I'll link to that directly as well, as where we have a bunch of builds recommended for people both starting out and maybe going further into their division journey. Here, though, I don't have a Tip of the Spears build anymore, but if we scroll down long enough, we come to these builds at the bottom, which start with the X number, or well, X instead of a number, and these are exactly that, X builds that I used to have and no longer do. In here, we do have a Tip of the Spears build from when they did the rebalance on it, which was around Project Resolve, if I remember correctly, or it was from Project Resolve. And I was trying it out, trying to see what would be the best version we could make out of it. This is kind of what I came up with, which is somewhat the same layout as, we could say, Striker. Back then, of course, Tinkerer and such did not exist. So yeah, Coyote is the build pictures exotic there. And on this, we're going with the backpack without the chest. We are going 4 pieces. We are not putting in a ninja bike, because actually, yeah, the backpack talent, it turns out that one is a separate multiplier. That 50% that it gives is actually a 50% amp. And it is active against for your weapons and such as well. So once you get a kill with a signature weapon, it's actually pretty strong. Together with advanced material for this season, this is not the worst way to go with it. Also, if you do use the backpack, you gain some more specialization ammo from that. But then advanced material gives you all of the specialization ammo as you have unlimited while it is active. And you can just activate it early and just get the specialization hours. So you don't per se need that bonus from the backpack for the increase to specialization weapon rounds that you receive, but it is still the big damage bonus to get here. Actually, for this season, it isn't the worst to use this together with Advanced Materiel, just because Advanced Materiel does add so much damage there. I would stick a Smart Cover into there as well if you're going, because from Advanced Materiel, you also get Skill Tier 6 if you have it at level 5, and then you would have that alongside of it. And that could make for a good enough build. One of the downsides of it is it bonus isn't on that first shot. So in the past, we used to use it, especially for TAC 50. Now, the first shot isn't bonus. You need to get a kill first, then you trigger the bonus from Aggressive Recon, the main talent of it. That kind of hurt it for Headhunter builds. And then on the red side of things, things like Umbra, things like Tipping Skills, things like Striker really outdamage this, and much more consistently as well. Still, maybe worth using for this season with Advanced Materiel, but I wouldn't per se consider this the one to go with. I would just hang on to that Ninja Bike, I would hang on to this Fox's Spur, maybe keep the Mechanical Animal as well. And the rest, as if we need it, we can also go and get it pretty quickly, as these gear sets pieces are also easy enough to farm if you need them again. Yeah, let's go on to the next one. As we go into Journey 5, this one is for Zealot. And I've actually, there's a bunch of places this could go. Let's not even speculate too much, because it could really be anything. Let's just grab it and let's see what we get out of this one. Here, we even got a level out of it, but alongside of that, legacy seasonal loot. So I wonder actually what this is going to be. I see we have a Ridgeway, we have the piece of named gear, and yeah, let's pop this. What is seasonal? Hunter's Fury, apparently. And yeah, that kind of makes sense with Zealot. One where you do want to get close, especially towards the end. Having some armor on kill makes a lot of sense. Ridgeway for some regen, because one of the downsides of Zealot is actually getting that end step. Now, with this build, you would want to be close anyway, but if you don't catch any enemies, you maybe on the next one could regen a little bit. So yeah, Anarchist Cookbook for Wicked, which would be actually the way to kind of run it alongside of Ridgeway. You would run Wicked on the backpack. I wouldn't per se run Anarchist Cookbook, but seeing as I don't think those talents, if they give us just gear, or if they give us just normal yellow gear, high-end gear, I don't think they can fix the talents. So this way they can guarantee we see the Wicked there. That's giving us a Carnage with Hunter's Fury. The Sadist makes a little bit of sense. I'm guessing, again, that's kind of the reason for it. They want us to consider Sadist. But yeah, you wouldn't want to use Carnage with Hunter's Fury. Let's go equip this and then discuss it further. And now with everything upon us, we can see it is 4-piece Hunter's Fury. I'm actually set up in what I would consider the better way to go with Hunter's Fury, where we use 4 pieces of it on without the chest and without the backpack. The backpack and the chest on Hunter's Fury from the gear set isn't that great, but the set itself is. We get SMG bonuses, which is kind of weird that they're giving us that Carnage with it. But I think actually thinking about it now as well with some of the other weapons, for instance as well, that Precision Strike at the start that we got, that could it could be more for the talent, because here we would want a Sadist weapon if we're going with a Ridgeway here, but we wouldn't want it to be the Carnage for this set. We're getting SMG bonuses, we're getting shotgun bonuses. I very much like this setup, actually. We'll show in a minute. I have a setup with Ridgeway specifically where we go with that and Wicked. And this would be kind of the way to set it up. I wouldn't go with Anarchist Cookbook while we gain a little bit more in time, because actually Anarchist Cookbook does not add to the damage of Wicked. It only adds to the duration of it. And with this set, if we're doing it right, we'll have the duration basically constantly being reset whenever we're in range to fight anyway. So it is not the greatest pick to go with that status effect as here, as we could, for instance, have instead a Grupo or a Cheska piece or a Sokolov piece. But overall, though, the 4 pieces of Hunter's Fury, they're in the right spots. I would definitely keep this. And yeah, we'll show in a second actually a very easy way to convert this into what we could consider a real build. And then even also show the Hunter's Fury that I would just recommend having in any way. Them giving us a Ridgeway through this is also very nice. So the Ridgeway normally would have been gotten through for newer players through doing the Summit project. And the summit project can take quite a while. You need to go up through the summit, even if you're kind of joining other people and trying to much more quickly do it. You still need to clear floor 100 once, get all of the requirements done, and then do floor 100 again, and then you have the project done. It is actually a longer one. Here it has been handed out, and once you have one, it is actually in your exotic pool, so you can get more of it as well if you need it for other characters, for instance. But also once you have one, that's likely the one that you'll need for most people. They just run one character anyway. So this can bypass that summit project, and that can be very handy. The Carnage as well is maybe worth keeping on, but especially the 4 pieces of Hunter's Fury are very usable. Let's show how. And for that, we'll come to the build collection again. Here I actually have a very similar setup to that Ridgeway one, where we have it on here on 5.14. We'll also show a normal-ish Hunter's Fury, where we don't go with the Ridgeway, but the Ridgeway actually works pretty well. It isn't one of the more powerful setups for Hunter's Fury, but it is actually one that works out pretty well. And I actually enjoy it, as long as we're not fighting mechanicals, because that's the big downside of this layout. As we saw with the game, we're exactly the same kind of layout. 5 of the pieces are even exactly the same, with 4 pieces of Hunter's Fury without the chest and the backpack, and then a Ridgeway chest. Here, though, I am going with a Grupo backpack here with Wicked instead of having the Anarchist Cookbook that I totally remember the name of, a piece we use so little. The reason for that being that the increase that a little bit more towards our stats with that crit damage from Grupo is actually much more useful than that status effect would be. That the status effect does apply to the bleed from Ridgeway, but that's not really the thing that we care the most about. We rather do a little bit more damage. We do take a sadist weapon, in this case though an SMG. Now I'm guessing they put those 2 pieces in because they will have fixed talents, so they can guarantee that you get Wicked and that you get Sadist. That's the idea with it, of course. And this then as well with Zealot makes a lot of sense. So Zealot being the active where we gain a lot of damage up front, and then also we gain a lot of defensive abilities up front. And then at the end of it, if we are close enough to the enemy and catch some of them in our explosion that happens at the very end of it when it runs out of its timer, then it will refill up a bunch of our health and armor. But if we don't, we'll be left at very low health and armor. And then this as well with the Ridgeway because the Ridgeway has a little bit of regen on it, as long as you're making enemies bleed within range. And that bleed as well will trigger Wicked for us. And then also we can use that together for Sadist. And what this turns up being is a little bit weaker than, for instance, going Obliterate Vigilance, or going, for instance, Memento with Obliterate or Intimidate. But overall still works out pretty well. And then we have a little bit of regen there. But yeah, you definitely would want to go with an SMG with Sadist. That Carnage doesn't make too much sense there, but I'm guessing they're putting that in to guarantee that you get a weapon with Sadist on it, just to put that idea in your head. Now, this already has been, I've already as well have a showcase on Hunter's Fury if you want to go and look at that. That does include this one, several other variants, but especially as well, the main variant for Hunter's Fury would be much more this one, where we are in 3.12 here, and I'll link these below, of course. Where we're taking a Grupo and a Sokolov piece on the chest and the backpack. We're avoiding still that chest and backpack from Hunter's Fury. They just don't have great bonuses. One increases the duration of the on-kill component of Hunter's Fury. The other gives you a little bit more range on the Disorient. Neither of those are really powerful. Obliterate, Vigilance are. Although I would say as well, one of the other ways to run this is usually with Memento. So Memento Obliterate or Memento Intimidate, because Intimidate can be triggered off of the bonus armor that you get from Memento. And overall, Hunter's Fury, well worth using. A gear set that I feel sometimes gets forgotten about, but it is still very powerful, very useful, especially solo. It is really great and can be used. The biggest downside of it is its range component, where, for instance, with some other of the other gear sets, it doesn't matter per se if we are close or not that much. We would still want to be in optimal range. Here being limited to 15 meters, for some places it just doesn't work out that easily. But you can make it work. I love Hunter's Fury, especially, for instance, in Summit and such, where it's all enclosed spaces. Same, for instance, for running most of the missions. For some missions, they're a little bit more open and wide, but a lot of the DC missions, and then, for instance, as well, the new Brooklyn missions, the smaller ones, this works out really well. And generally, I would want to have 2 blue cores on it, or 2 cores going towards the shield. So either I put in a memento, and then, for instance, take 2 tiers from that. Otherwise, one thing we can do as well is just take 2 blue cores. So for instance, here, 2 blue cores just for 2-tier shield. I like having a 2-tier shield. And yeah, this actually would line up really well with the Zealot active modifier as well. So actually, layout-wise, well worth keeping some of these pieces, especially the 4 Hunter's Fury pieces. Just take those. They come with a red piece or red stats anyway. Now, you could farm up for better ones, going through countdown and trying to find ones with a little bit more stats. But for instance, here as well, we've gotten one with crit chance, with full stats, and that would be well worth using. So hang on to that. And the Ridgeway is well worth keeping on to for one of them. And we'll go to the next journey step here on 6, which is not the last one, but before it. This one is centered around Caches. This could, again, as well be a lot of different builds. I could see them putting in here. I would expect maybe having an eyeless weapon here, although eyeless, perfect eyeless would only be on the darkness, which wouldn't be a good weapon, but maybe we get that. But this could be basically anything. It would still maybe be a build that centers around the shield, because that does get affected, or that does affect the range of Caches. But enough speculation. Let's claim and let's see if we hit any notes there. So hardwired with a BTSU data glove and some other unmarked kind of pieces. Also, we are gonna get a green piece, which is extremely rare at level 40, because last time around we got actually a blue piece in these caches, and I'm still hanging on to it because it is very rare to see a green or blue with that. Although actually in the end, yeah, that doesn't hold true, it looks like. It was just mismarked, maybe. But yeah, there we got some hardware pieces. Let me equip everything and then we'll discuss it. And here with all the pieces here, I had the reaction while putting it on of going like, oh, it's the Seeker spam. I wasn't actually paying attention as they popped up there. But this is the layout for the Seeker spam build. And actually, that is a legitimate build and well worth speccing into and trying out. Now here though, again, I don't think with the high-end pieces that they can set a talent, so we're just getting a random piece here. And here we've got a Mad Bomber. We wouldn't want to go with that, but we do get a BTSU data glove, and a BTSU is well worth having for a lot of skill builds, even some offensive ones like this hardwired, especially if you want to make healers, or for instance even a foam eclipse will generally want to have at least access to a BTSU data glove. So this exotic is actually used in a lot of builds, and because of that it is well worth hanging on to, and we're getting it here pretty easily. Together with that, 4 pieces of hardwired. This would be pretty easy to farm up anyway, but here, actually pretty easy, much more easily here already gotten. And actually, this is very much in line with the Seeker spam build that we'll look into in a second. We are also getting together with this a Harmony, which is actually a DZ item. So well worth hanging on to this. If you don't have one yet, you would generally put Detox as the 3rd stat here. And then the thing with the Harmony is it is perfect in sync, perfectly in sync. And while the test subject is pretty easy to get, especially having a capacitor, which we could also very easily get, which would be used in a lot of skill builds, we would put still, I quite often put a Harmony alongside of it, just because we can have rifle ammo then being used. And then if we run out of capacitor rounds, the Harmony is a really good secondary on a bunch of skill builds. And overall, yeah, this is well worth keeping together with the BTSU data gloves. They get used in a lot of builds. And actually, layout-wise, this is a familiar build. Let's actually go look at that. And back to the collection we go. We're here on 2.08. We see actually a very similar layout as we'll open that one up here. And this is actually, yeah, the layout as we saw it there. It is a popular build, one that I actually enjoy using. Hardwired got a pretty big buff to it. It kind of went under the radar, mostly because Seeker spams are, in certain situations, pretty powerful. But, for instance, a Fire Eclipse in a group setting, if there's 3 red builds there and I get to pick, for instance, to go Fire Eclipse or this, I would likely go Fire Eclipse and make things go pretty fast. This has actually, yeah, some interesting gameplay to it. If you're interested, I already have a build showcase on this exact style of build, where hardwired is especially used. And the hardwired gear set, what it does is that it can, the feedback loop on its 4 pieces, once we have the full talent, it will allow, if you deploy one of the skills, it will reduce the cooldown of the other skill by 30 seconds. This can be done with the backpack here every 5 seconds. And if we reduce the cooldown, if the cooldown was already below that 30 seconds, it instantly resets that skill. So what this build does is actually tosses out a Seeker, then it puts out its Hive, it gets a fresh Seeker again, we toss out that fresh Seeker, and then of course the interaction between the BTSU Data Glove and the Hive means that Hive first of all will recharge very quickly, but also when we deconstruct the Hive, we will do an overcharge. But actually with the BTSU Data Glove, this build also being at 6 skill tiers, we do a supercharge, which is still an overcharge, but then group wide. So that usually I call a supercharge, and that is a group wide overcharge. And in a group setting, this can be very powerful. This can quite often be actually a very interesting build alongside of other players. If you kind of need this as a support build to others, it can deal a lot of its own damage, but it doesn't deal well with things like heavies and such. And also, if there is a lot of elites around, or somewhat, for instance, enemies like rogues, they will quite often just jump out of your skills. But against a lot of enemies, especially if you're alongside some reds, they can deal with the tanks and such, and warhounds and mini tanks, things that would take longer for this build to kill. But overall, hardwired is well worth using. This build kind of flew under the radar, I feel, for most, but it's well worth trying out. I've been considering redoing the build showcase for it because it has been changed quite a bit. Mostly that backpack talent went from a 10-second cooldown with the backpack to now a 5-second cooldown with the backpack. And 5 seconds is very quick. You can actually, once you kind of get the hang of it, get a lot of Seekers going out, and that's then where the name of it comes from, Seeker spam. So actually what we're getting in the game is very similar to a real build that we can alter it into. Now we were getting an electric chest there. Status effect doesn't make too much sense here. It would really only apply to the Stinger Hive's bleed, not even the Stinger Hive hit. What we really go with is actually a China Light Industries chest there with glass cannon, as glass can improve our damage by quite a bit, and then together with that China Light, of course, applying to the explosions. Although in this case, actually, as trivia, it doesn't apply actually to the explosions of the Stinger. It doesn't actually increase the damage of that. That's only skill damage, but we also have a ton of skill damage going around. But the Hive's interaction together with the BTSU Data Gloves actually makes for a very pretty good build overall, though, still. We could also, one of the settings that we can take this into as well is we can actually go with a little bit more repair skills instead of those mods. Put a healing Hive there and kind of be an in-between between, we spam the Seekers, but then we also spam a healing Hive and try to keep our allies upright. Overall, a build well worth using. I would recommend, if you're kind of interested into it, maybe go watch the build showcase on it. And the build itself is well worth making. And here we're basically getting 5 out of the 6 pieces we would need. Generally, I would rather run it with the capacitor than, for instance, the harmony, but the harmony can make for a really good second piece in there. Capacitor can be gotten through the summit if you haven't gotten one ever before. It's just 5 challenges in the summit, so it's a pretty quick get. And all you would need is, overall, I would say, still a better chest than this electric. China Light would be the dream, but even having just something Wyvern or such would be fine. But yeah, you would want to go for that China Light chest. But that wouldn't also be a hard piece to get. It is yellow core, you want it with yellow stats, and that shouldn't be too hard to come by. Just having skill damage and then glass would be enough, even if you're missing out on that skill haste, for instance. And overall, then, you have actually this build altogether. Let's move on to that last one. Although actually, before we do, because I realized something after I stopped recording there, and that is that, wait, what does this have to do with, say, cheese? And the answer to that is there's actually a variant of this. I generally want to go with the Hive as a secondary, but a lot of people like the easiness of using the shield here. Now, normally I would very much recommend not going this route because I feel you're giving up effectively one of your skills. If you're keeping the Seekers, but leaving, for instance here as well, then the BTSU glove makes a little bit sense if we're not going with a Hive. But when enemies are blinded, they don't roll out of the Seekers. And that's actually then, I think, the thing that they're trying to go for here. Then the BTSU is a weird choice, but they likely just went with the common way that this is ran, which is with the BTSU glove still then. But then here, yeah, we would go with the shield. We could go, for instance, with Hive, but that wouldn't make sense. You would want to do the Seeker spam. The Seekers are overall one of the better skills. You can also try to do it with a sticky, with the explosive sticky, and then resetting it every 5 seconds, and that can actually be pretty good as well. With the shield, it is a lot easier to reset on that 5 seconds, but I feel if you get good with the Hive itself is also a damaging component and can be very powerful by itself. But if we're using the shield, yeah, we get access to that extended range of, say, cheese. Even though at level 5, actually, it is 30 meters, so I would just use the Seekers by itself, or the Stinger Hive by itself, and then not use the shield, maybe. But actually, now I'm thinking about it, is that, yeah, they put a few red builds in there. They wanted to maybe put a skill build in there. And it does make a little bit of sense here, because once the enemies are blinded, they won't actually roll out of the Seekers. And I might actually try that with the actual version. Just running, say, cheese, basically, yeah, grabbing them in place, and then seeing if the Seekers have a better time maybe destroying them, because we can also with, say, cheese at level 5, every 20 seconds, we can blind an entire room, and then if we follow that up with the Seeker, that might be interesting. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in because, yeah, towards the end of it, I was like, wait, what does this have to do with, say, cheese? And actually those enemies that are blinded will be getting hit by those Seekers, so that might be an interesting way to go with it. And here to Journey 7 as the very last one. This one's tied to Sanitation overall, so I don't... what builds... Maybe Eclipse? The Eclipse would fit in here well, Fire Eclipse going this route. I would maybe expect as well that they give us a weapon with maybe Ignited, so likely a Pyromaniac with perfect Ignited. But yeah, let's claim this and see what we get here. As we go into here, and, well, it does give us a Val, it gives us 4 pieces of a gear set. It doesn't show which one, though. I would think Eclipse. Eclipse kind of lines up well with Sanitation, and that's exactly what they went with. They also went with a goalie, which, okay, yeah, it is one of the ones that does apply to status effects. I feel Pyromaniac would make a little bit more sense there. But also here as well, it's giving us a Val, a very good piece to have. This does go into a bunch of builds. And then together with that, 4 pieces of Eclipse. And although here they're going with the chest, but without the backpack, which is interesting for a fire setup, where we would generally go with the backpack as well. But, well, we're keeping these pieces overall, though, because, for instance, as well, Courier does get C use, but more so in foam eclipses. Yeah, let's see this equipped and then discuss it. And here with it all equipped, we see an Eclipse setup here with 4 pieces of Eclipse with the chest, but without the backpack, with a Val mask. And the Val is well worth using. With Eclipse, generally, we do use with fire eclipses specifically, because there's 2 ways of setting up Eclipse, really. One is with foam, the other is with fire. Foam Eclipse gets much more used in Legendary and such, and for instance in Master missions, or even for instance for fighting the Hunters on Summit Floor 100, and Foam Eclipse is really handy in that fight. But then they usually don't get set up with the Val, but they do get set up with the Courier, which we received as well, which is the perfect Creeping Death backpack here. But then for fire eclipses, where we set them up with a fire chem mostly, you generally want to go with the Eclipse backpack. But that would be very easy to get, as yeah, just doing 1 countdown likely with targeted set to Eclipse, you'll get that backpack and you could make a fire eclipse out of it. Eclipse is a build type well worth having and experiencing and getting experienced with. I like it a lot. I quite often do still say that, even though I run it not as often as I used to in the past, but I still quite often call myself an Eclipse main, almost. As in the past, definitely I would just, whenever we were doing missions or such, or open world, I would be the one, dedicated to running Eclipse and making it go faster, as I do feel that, for instance, in a lot of missions and such, having 1 fire eclipse together with 3 damage dealers, let's say strikers, that's going to go faster in most missions than it would with just 4 strikers. Having that CC and such, giving the ability for the strikers to do their damage, kind of helps out, or well, damage dealers. Could be also tipping skills, umbras, negotiators, but you know, a lot of strikers about. But for that though, for the fire one, we would definitely not want to go with without the backpack. The backpack increases our damage. The chest increases our duration on spread and our radius of it, as it clips any of the status effects that we apply, which then also includes sanitation in this case, where we can set enemies on fire with that sanitation at the initial blast of it. Any of those that is applied to the enemy, if they die with that status effect from any source, that can also be from your allies, they don't need to die to the status effect or such, it spreads the eclipse status effects around. And that is very powerful because it can keep a status effect going. And of course, with sanitation, that is actually super strong for this season. Let's take it to the build collection where we'll see an actual version of it. And let's take it to the build collection again, where here on 3.05, I have a general fire eclipse setup. I do have actually multiple eclipses. As I said, I do like running my eclipses. So for instance, we have on 1.05, we have a glass version of it. On 4.05, we have a foam version of it. And even on 5.05, we have a different setup for fire. And there's a lot of ways you can set up eclipse. This one, though, I generally call the baseline. And actually, as well, I have a master class even on eclipses where I go very in-depth with it, which is basically an extended build showcase where we go over multiple builds, but also have a build showcase for fire eclipse. So if you're interested in this build style, please go watch those as well with some gameplay and some more explaining on what the build exactly does and how it works. Here though, as we saw in the game, we didn't get the backpack, and that's generally the way we would set up a fire eclipse. The courier would be much more for a foam eclipse, but then on a foam eclipse, we wouldn't use the Val. So the way that it's given to us, and also for just general use on heroic and such, I would much more lean towards a fire eclipse, and that's also where I would recommend starting at, for instance. A foam eclipse, though, is very useful for legendary and such. Here, we would want to get the backpack. The backpack adds to our damage by quite a bit, and that also includes our fire damage. So what we would do is take the chest and the backpack. We would have an electric piece, preferably on one of the other pieces. So it can actually be either the glove, the knee pad, or the holster. The position doesn't per se matter. We would want it to be an electric piece where we get status effect. If you had to, for instance, if you don't have an electric piece, but you have a Hanny U piece or a Wyvern piece, you could for the time being, but yeah, in the grand scheme of things, you would want to farm up an electric piece, and that's not too hard nowadays. In the past, we used to farm up Golan, which had the same 10% status effect, but came with a blue core, so we had to recore it. And because of it had a blue core, it would come with miners more often that were blue. Here though, for a fire eclipse, yeah, we just want to get the backpack. Although as the layout was there with the creeping death, we could run it, but losing out on the backpack is a big deal to it. I would generally want to have that backpack there. And yeah, we do get the Val. The Val is a little bit of extra damage, especially on the fire version. That works out pretty well. On the foam version, we would generally actually not run the Val. We would instead run something like a BTSU and have an overcharge together with, for instance, a healing hive or a booster hive, as that's much more useful to have there in the situations that we generally use the foam eclipse for. Now we got a goalie, which is perfect pressure point as its talent. Pressure point increases damage against status affected enemies. Now in the case of an eclipse with fire, so that's likely as well. They gave a goalie they're going kind of splitting the margins between a foam and a fire eclipse, giving you some of the pieces for one and some of the pieces for others. I would lean towards going with a fire eclipse starting out and just trying it out on heroic and such. As especially on legendary, it is not just running the build, it is also understanding where all the spawns are going to be for a foam eclipse. The player playing that, if you want to be, very quick and coordinated about it, it's best to be on an experienced player that knows where the spawns are and such. But with a fire eclipse, I would generally go with either a Scorpio or a capacitor. Capacitor, again, very easy to get. We can also go with other shotguns with either in sync or, for instance, here the lefty. The lefty also pretty easy to get. This is general named. It is not one of the DZ/PvP names, so pretty easy to get. Scorpio though lines up really well, and for instance, in the build showcase and in the masterclass, I kind of show how I use that to, for instance, keep enemies kind of staggered so we can very easily set them on fire. Overall, having a fire eclipse or a foam eclipse is well worth having. It is very much a recommended build. And here with this, we are actually getting a lot of the pieces we would use there. So for a fire eclipse, I would maybe lean into getting that backpack, getting that eclipse backpack, finding a piece of electric. You would have to re-roll these pieces, and this would be also very easy to do because they come with skill tiers already, so you just put status effect underneath this, and you would want it to be status effect. You get a few skill haste mods into the mix. Now, you could hang on to this courier, especially if you get one, for instance, that has status effect as one of its stats for future use with a foam eclipse, because with a foam eclipse, yeah, we would take the eclipse mask, so we wouldn't take the Val generally, we would take a courier and then usually a BTSU or just a Hana U piece instead. Now, this goalie, you can hang on to it as well. The goalie isn't per se a really great weapon. We don't use it that often. Pressure point, though, is very useful as a talent. For instance, for OD, much more so and such. But you can use that as well to get some quicker kills going. But usually the capacitor will outdamage anything else that you could have, for instance, here. Now, overall, though, Eclipse. You have 4 or 5 out of the pieces for it. Well, 4 actually. So yeah, we just get a backpack, we just get a little piece, and you can just play around with a fire eclipse. Well worth having. And together with that, of course, it lines up really well with Sanitation, the active that is kind of tied to. Sanitation also sets things on fire for you. So yeah, this can gain a lot of damage for it, as also Sanitation's buff, its separate multiplier that it puts on as per stacks you go up, you gain more of. That actually applies to everything, including the fire from a fire eclipse. So yeah, it is actually very useful of a build together with Sanitation. And this one, more than most of these, is truly one of the builds to go for. I feel actually, looking back at it, the Hunter's Fury and this are definitely the pieces you want to hang on to. Hardwired, you could go with the jumbled high end that we got at the start for Spiced Up. Not so much. And then with the Spear as well is somewhat weaker. But yeah, let's take it to a conclusion here. And to conclude this video, these journey caches are actually pretty fun for me, as this is basically as close as I'll get to a reaction video with these, as we get to react to what we get from these and then try to come up with what we would do with it, and also kind of what their dev's intent was with it. As all of those caches definitely contain things that were in line with some of the active modifiers that those journeys were tied to. And overall, it was, there are some actually interesting ideas in there and interesting. For instance, actually, I hadn't considered using Say Cheese with the Seeker spam and then providing my own CC effectively with Say Cheese. And actually, I'm going to go try that out. That was actually an interesting idea in there. Some of the other ones, though, I wouldn't say are as well cooked as that one, as for instance, that jumbled mess that we got out of the high end. Yeah, I wouldn't, per se. You would be giving up way too much to gain the bonuses, those brand bonuses, and the stats that provided with the 3-piece Cheska and with the Forge and with the Empress piece. But overall, though, these are actually also a lot of pretty free pieces for newer players. Now, this time around, I did notice they didn't give us any exotic weapons at all, but they give us a bunch of exotic gear, and that's well worth having. Getting a Val, getting a Ridgeway, getting a BTSU Data Glove, that's actually really handy for newer players. Even that Ninja Bike is sometimes useful. The Rugged will likely turn into an exotic component. But also for more experienced players, if nothing else, there's a bunch of resources here. 5 exotic components extra. We can't say no to that. But there's also some ideas here, and especially if you haven't tried out some of these builds, if you haven't tried out Eclipse, if you haven't tried out Hardwired, if you haven't tried out Hunter's Fury, those 3 are definitely top-end builds and well worth trying out. Although I would say Eclipse and the Hunter's Fury definitely are top-end builds. The Hardwired is more of a niche build, but quite enjoyable to play, and trying to get the most out of that build can be very enjoyable. The jumbled mess that they give us on the high ends for Spiced Up, I kind of get it, but yeah, that one's a little bit too far out there, and yeah, you could make something better out of it. And also, Tip of the Spear is just not competitive enough, and especially leaving out the backpack is actually hurting it a little bit. But you could go and get that backpack and try out that variant that we had there. For this season with advanced material, that should actually work out perfectly fine. And yeah, overall, this is actually an enjoyable thing each season. I do enjoy that they're doing this. This, for some more veteran players, will give them maybe that are stuck in sometimes, just the red mindset. You have some of the pieces now, maybe go and try some of these builds out. For newer players, this can be some of the starting points for them to build on, and then hopefully this video is kind of helpful for that, on what to keep, especially from some of these caches. But then also, if you want to even take it further, if one of those builds, if you just equip the pieces and just run around with it, you go like, oh, this is interesting. Well, an upgrade, an advancement path has been given to you now for at least some of them. So yeah, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please do any and all of the algorithm things down below. It does help out. So I'll do that a little bit of shilling. For future videos, we're going to go into the Tempest in-depth look, as yeah, that is very much one I want to tackle. And we'll go over it and its and some of the builds for it. But yeah, that'll come up in the future. I hope to catch you all there. And as always, have a good night.